All righty, welcome and thank you for joining us today. This is the back to basics specking, and one of those things is um, for people that know Purkeys. That's we started off. We were a starter and alternator remanufacturer, and we were a battery distributor. For many years, I called on fleets and talked about battery starters. Did a lot of training on voltage drop, things like that. And as I get out in the field now that we've gotten away from that, it seems like a lot of fleets are forgetting some of the basics because we don't do those training classes on the test equipment, everything. Look at batteries, and seems like a lot of fleets are forgetting some of those basics we talked about a long time ago. Talk to them about starters and alternators, and um, I don't think people pay as much attention to all those things as they did in the past. So we want to kind of back up and talk about some of the basics and all these things. And first off, we're going to talk about trucks, but these are all electrical systems. Whether you're talking about a truck with the batteries, cranking system, charging system, you're talking about a reefer, you're talking about a liftgate. Now we're talking about EPUs and APUs. These are all still electrical systems. Every one of them still has its own battery. So we got to go back through and look at all those things and make sure we're still doing the right things that again seems like have been forgotten about. And one of the biggest things that I see is people aren't doing the training that they need to. They assume techs know how to use a multimeter, and I do probably still half a dozen classes a month at different fleets or different organizations, and it's apparent techs do not know how to use meters. And we say meters, that's one thing, but we've got the electrical system testers. There's many different brands out there that they've become very intelligent test equipment. That stuff has tablets on it now, so it gives you diagrams and instructions, all those things. But most techs never get trained on it. He's like, here, hand a technician the tester, go test the batteries. Well, if he doesn't know what he's doing or understand what that tester's doing and understand the importance of doing everything in the right order, you know, garbage in, garbage out. So, again, one of the first things is, just because you bought equipment for the shops or for the techs, don't mean they know how to use it, don't mean they're using it correctly. So training is probably still one of the biggest things. And we talk about, the equipment, that's, everything from, again, the electrical system testers, multimeters, clip-on amp meters. And along with that is the service tools. I go to a lot of fleets again and look at the cart for the electrical PM or whatever. I don't see anybody using lead adapters. If you don't use the lead adapters, or some of the battery manufacturers are recommending brass adapters. But bottom line is those adapters force a tech to get a good connection down on the lead pad, or maybe a brass pad, again depending upon battery. But the electrical connection is that pad. It's not the stainless steel stud. And if you don't use a battery brush of some sort to get it clean, none of your battery tests are going to be right. So, one, they have to be available to them, and somebody has to show them the importance of it all. Then just kind of talk about vehicle specs as a whole. Again, we talk about these are all a electrical system. When we're talking about the truck, it has batteries, it has a starter, it's got an alternator. And on top of that, it all has cables that connect it. If everything doesn't connect and work good, you can have the best batteries in the world, best starter in the world. If you don't have good cables, they're not properly maintained, nothing's going to work. And again, just last week during an event, I had several people tell me that their battery costs have just gone through the roof. The number of replacements they're doing is just scary. Um, and based on the numbers they told me, they're not wrong. But again, you got to look at all these things as the entire system. Same thing, liftgate. You got batteries. You got to make sure you put the right batteries in it. What's the charging system? So one thing we're going to talk about, just a 30,000-foot view, is you got to select the right battery. And the battery is the heart of the electrical system on all these systems. There's different applications. Whether it's a reefer, a truck, and even in a truck, is it a day cab or is it a sleeper truck? How many batteries you're putting in there. You got to use the right spec. I still see a lot of fleets use the old thing of bigger's got to be better. High CCA is not what you need. You need a good cycling battery with lots of reserve capacity. People ask me about, manufacturer. All of them make good batteries. You got to find the one that's right for your application. Generally, I'll tell you whatever's on the sale flyer is not the best battery for you. It's whatever, someone makes the most money on. But you got to look at chemistry. For years we all ran flooded cell. A lot of fleets run AGM, and you're seeing, lithium come into the market. They all have their place. They're all good batteries, can give you good life, but you got to make sure you get the right one for it, and you still have to maintain it. One of the other things I always talk about on batteries is one of the biggest things to a successful battery program is a good partner that sells you batteries. Do they care? Are they, helping you recover warranty? Obviously the best warranty out there is one you never use, but batteries, and just like anything else, are going to fail. So are they taking care of your warranty? Are they taking care of your scrap? One thing I've always said is I don't trust anybody that if I have batteries that I know under a warranty, they should be, marked and set out there. So when the dealership or, whoever's, taking care of your battery program, they know, hey, I've got 6 batteries over there that should be warranty. And next week, when he comes back, they should be bringing me my replacements. Starters, again, we don't do this anymore, but it's still, something that a fleet has to look at. Because, I have electrical devices that go on the truck. It's in my best interest to make sure, that fleet's entire electrical system's right. If there's deficiencies, is it going to impact my product? Yes, it will. But you want to look at manufacturers. There's still several manufacturers out there. Again, who takes care of you? What's the warranty? More and more fleets are concerned with weight. As we get into APUs and EPUs, we're adding batteries, a lot of things. The emission systems, they've added a lot of weight. So, if we can save, weight on the starter, that's, still a benefit to you. But look at some, some of the different things, for warranty, overcrank protection, all those things, you do have some choice in there what's going to work best for you. Same thing with alternators. There's a lot of options out there. Again, you got brush units, you got brushless units. What is your amperage curve? And one of the biggest things, again, we see in the APU market is, nobody wants the truck to run. They want it to shut off until it, optimized idle or whatever system's going to, fire it up to recharge those batteries. So you got to find the happy medium is, what's going to give me my best charging curve? And there's a lot to that anymore. I know that the OEMs have learned a lot from the EV market on finding that sweet spot that, where does your truck run? That's, you may get better performance out of a 240 amp alternator than a 260, just because of how you run, you're in that sweet spot of charging. But again, too, is, warranty can be a big issue between a brush and brushless unit. But even though you pick the right starter, right alternator, you got to make sure the OEM provides you with the right cables to connect it all. That is something that a lot of times you can spec now, even to say, hey, I'm going to over-spec my charge cables to make sure it's going to last the life of my truck. But one of the biggest things I still see is nobody checks this stuff when it's new. And I've volunteered for a lot of fleets is, hey, when you buy new trucks, let's go take a look at them. Do they meet TMC specs for voltage drop? That if it doesn't meet it when it's new, is it going to get any better as you, have this truck longer and longer? So, we got to make sure we check all those things. There's a spec out there for a reason. Some of the fleets I deal with, and suppliers deal with, they're even doing aftermarket cables just to get that circuit resistance down as low as they can. So when that engine does have to, fire up, that they can get as much energy back in those batteries as quick as they can to cut down the length of time it has to run. That if you've got bad cables, that, same truck may have to run for 2 hours to put the same amount of energy in that, a properly spec'd and properly set up and maintained truck could put in less than an hour. Getting a little bit more into, the actual, PM thing is, again, calling fleets all over, and, I'm always, being nosy and opening up battery boxes. Again, a lot of people have forgotten the basics on these things. And all these pictures are going to show you, examples of what we've seen in real world. This was actually a liftgate, but you got, 3 different makes and models of batteries. Everything's corroded. is, start the obvious, take a look at it. Am I getting corrosion? How often am I checking these things? I'm still old school, and I think batteries ought to be, looked at twice a year. Rule of thumb is always springtime before you get into the heat of summer, and fall before you get into the cold of winter. Is, take a look at them, clean them, make sure the hold downs are right. If those hold downs weren't important, you think the OEMs would put them on there? No, they would have saved the money. So you do have to maintain them, make sure they're tight. With the corrosion and stuff we see anymore, I'm a big fan of, anti-seize. That, make sure you're protected so that, these things do come apart when you do have to service them. The other thing too is, if you look at batteries, whoops, and I missed a picture somewhere, but on these pictures you can see, especially this one, the right-hand picture of the battery on the far left, you can see the date code of that battery on there. That's when that battery, there's two of them generally on batteries. One is a manufactured sticker, and the other one is a ship sticker. If you don't mark your batteries, warranty is going to be, based on when that battery was made or shipped. So if you've got batteries that sit on your shelf for a few months, you can very easily lose warranty. One of the things I highly recommend is, make sure your techs have paint pens. Even if you're in a independent service place, you ought to write on them, when those batteries are installed. That's when your warranty should start, which can also do some handy things for you. If you open up a battery box and say, hey, we were just in here, 2 months ago and put batteries in it, another set of batteries is not going to fix it. There's something else wrong with that, refrigeration unit or truck or liftgate or whatever. Also, the flip side of that is you can look at it and says, ooh, hey, these batteries have been in here 5 years or 4 years or whatever. These things are on borrowed time. It's, money ahead for me to go ahead and change them now. We got our money out of them. How long is that? Depends on your fleet and application and everything. But still, no matter what, batteries have a certain life, and they're going to get to that point. You're better off pulling them now before they cause you a road call. Because if you do go down at, road service place, more often than not, you're going to wind up putting batteries in it. I'm talking about doing, electrical PM, is you have to check the entire system. A lot of times techs, only, do part of the system. That's, again, twice a year I would do this, but especially if you have a write-up for a problem. What's the first thing that ought to be done? Is the batteries. The batteries are the heart of the electrical system. They should be separated, everything clean, wire brush, load test them. Again, I'm not going to talk about different types of testers. There's many different ones out there, but you have to use a good quality tester. Make sure a tech understands how to use it. The other thing you do is you do your cranking cable voltage drop. If we can't get that energy from the batteries to the cranking motor, it's not going to perform right. Then after that, you would test the charge cables. And the reason we do it in this order is pretty much every OEM runs their charging cables from the alternator to the starter, then uses the cranking cables to go back. So do it that order. That way, if you do have a problem, you can kind of work on it as you go. And the last step is then test the alternator. But if you don't make all these things right, if you've got bad batteries or severely discharged batteries, can you test the cables? No. Can you check the alternator? No. So you have to do them in the right order. If a truck is good, this test does not take very long at all. To do the voltage drop test with the right equipment, you're looking at maybe 10 minutes. But that way the system is right. Here's examples of the cable testing. Whether you're doing the cranking cables or doing the charging cables, you're simply using a load tester, whether again it's electronic tester or old-fashioned carbon pile. You're going to hook it up to the starter for the cable testing. Your external leads to the starter, or to the batteries, I'm sorry. Put a load on it and check the voltage drop on them. Again, this goes back to TMC RP 129. This standard spec has been around for 40 some odd years, maybe longer. Same thing then too, to test your alternator cables. And this isn't, again, something I made up. This is an industry spec that's been out there for a long time. And again, we're talking about trucks, but the same rules apply for refrigeration unit, liftgate. There is voltage drop tests for all those, and the same battery tests apply to all of them. One thing as we go through doing a system on a truck, inevitably you're going to find some weak batteries or some severely discharged batteries. Just because a battery is just discharged does not mean it's bad. I see very few fleets that are still using recharge stations. For the number of batteries that fleets are going through, that is money well spent to invest in a recharge program. And I was talking to a guy the other day, says we don't have time. And I said, for the number of batteries you go through, you could hire a person just to run your recharge program. The other time that he's not doing it, sweep floors, and you could still save a ton of money. But we talk about a recharge program is it has to be organized. So I got a slide out of orders here. Yes, somehow we had some technical difficulties and we lost a slide. There was an example of a bad battery room versus a good one. And this one's a good one. And when I say that, it's well organized. That, again, there's nothing wrong with doing a recharge program. The biggest things that you have to think about when you have a recharge program, though, is number one, it's one person's job. Maybe and I did have a question pop in. I'm going to cover it more of a wrap up, but we'll say if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to type them in. But for a recharge program, too many cooks spoil the stew. One person per shift, and it has to be owned by them. The only time another technician should be in that area is if they pulled out batteries out of a truck or a reefer or whatever. There is one dedicated, cart, pallet, shelf, whatever, where they drop them off. If you have equipment that has the ability to print out test results, they should print out those tests and put it with it. So as they go through those batteries, they can look at them and say, hey, yes, these batteries were tested properly. Looking at his printout, it was done right. I know these batteries are bad. I don't have to do anything with them other than check and see if it's within a warranty period. If there's no printout or that printout doesn't look right, say, yesterday someone brought you batteries and they were load tested at 32 degrees. Well, where did you find 32 degrees to load test the batteries? Odds are that, obviously they were tested improperly. They put in the wrong information with the tester. So then you got to go back through them. But again, there's a process for all of it. You go through and you sort them. Says, hey, these batteries are worth charging. You put them on charger. Once they're done charging, if depending upon charger you have, but so say they did pass the charging process, load test them, put them on the side, let them sit 24 hours. After 24 hours, load test them again. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing here, but again, if you go through all those procedures, test it, and if it comes out the other end and it is a good battery, there is nothing wrong with putting it back in that truck. Because again, batteries a lot of times are simply discharged. Driver left headlights on, left refrigerator on for the weekend. That those batteries aren't bad, they're just simply discharged. One thing I always tell fleets too is if you do run a recharge program, you have to assign a different part number to those batteries that are going to be used as recharge so you can track it. Another reason why the paint pen is handy is you can look at those things and see, has it been through the recharge program before? How old is the battery? If it does fail, then again, you've got that date code on. If it was a replacement battery, hey, we know this thing was only in for 10 months. We still got warranty. If you don't do any of that, once battery leaves the truck, it totally loses identity. All right, we got our first poll question for today. How often should you complete a PM? First answer is A, yearly, B, twice a year, or C, whenever there's a write-up for an electrical issue. Just hover over the A, B, C, click on it. I'm kind of watching, see how many people answer. So I'll give you just a little bit here to select your answer. Okay, starting to slow down, so I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. Yes, most everybody got it right. And actually, it's a little bit of a trick question because there's actually two right answers. No matter what, it should be done at least twice a year. But the other thing, too, is if there's a write-up for electrical issue, you need to go through the whole thing. That, again, any of these things can be an indicator that there is a problem with that truck somewhere. All right, thank you for participating there. All right, next time we're talking about solar. Not here to sell solar. The idea is just, solar is one of the worst things out there in the industry for, people don't pay attention to it. It's out of sight, out of mind. And solar can be, anything from a 20-watt system to, 500 plus watts. But one of the biggest things when we talk about it is, what are you trying to do with it? Are you only trying to offset parasitics when the truck's sitting there? Are you trying to extend life, or key off time during, APUs or whatever? But you have to understand what you're trying to accomplish with it to make sure, it's doing what it's supposed to anyway. But first thing, you got to look at it. Obviously on a truck, it's usually going to be mounted up on the fairing somewhere, high up. Trailer, generally speaking, is going to be mounted towards the end of a trailer. And the reason why that is protect the wiring. The nice thing is usually, with solar, it's done on a liftgate trailer and you can go down the rear column of the gate. Good thing about it, it's very protected. Bad thing about it, nobody ever sees it at all. So you do actually have to get up there and take a look at it. We're, looking at a fleet the other day and, whoops, and we have another picture missing. So apologies on this, but previous slide we're talking about showed a harness coming down from a solar panel on the roof of a truck or the fairing of a truck. Somewhere it got damaged. Nobody ever noticed it. Nobody ever checked it. So they invested the money in solar and they weren't getting the benefit simply because, wire was damaged. Easy fix. You can cut it, properly repair the wire and go on. But if you don't check it, you're obviously never going to get the advantage of it. So not only do you have to do the physical inspection, but one thing you should always do too is actually do an electrical test on it. Best way to do that is with a clip-on amp meter. Is you put it around the output from the solar controller to the batteries. Again, whether that's reefer, truck, liftgate, whatever. One of the things found out is one thing that's very handy whenever you're trying to test solar is you have to know how much available light there is. And one thing, just because it's a sunny day or you think it's a sunny day, does not mean it's harvesting all the solar light or even the right type of solar light to accurately test that panel. So there's a inexpensive meter you can buy that just reads light being absorbed. So you want to look at that, know what that available power is, and compare it to what your solar is putting out. For example, that solar panels can harvest 100% input is if this meter, this particular one reads 1,000 units. If that unit's only reading 500 units, your panel can only put out half of what it's rated at. The other thing you got to be very careful too is you're trying to test it with batteries that are discharged. If your truck batteries or whatever are already 100% state of charge, what's the solar panel going to be doing? Same thing as an alternator if the batteries are charged. It's just kind of along for the ride. So in order to get a fair test, if it's a gate, you may have to go cycle the gate a few times, pull those batteries down a little bit to get an accurate reading out of it. If it's a truck, you may turn headlights on, something to pull those batteries down to get an accurate reading. And one thing we didn't cover yet, but we'll go ahead and ask it as a poll question. Does dirt on a solar panel affect its performance? We got three options again. A is yes, B is no, and C is the good old maybe. So I'll give you all a couple seconds to answer this again. Got about 37% that have answered. go ahead and move on. So I'm kind of glad I didn't answer it yet or discuss it yet. Does dirt on solar panel affect its performance? Honestly, not really. We've done a lot of testing out there, and within reason, if they're just a little bit dirty or, normal use, really doesn't impact them. We've done a bunch of them where we test them, cleaned them. Now, you get into some of the, like the Northwest where you got lots of rain, and you actually almost get, moss and mildew growing on top of a trailer. It can be more of an issue, but generally, normal application, trucks get enough rain and everything to keep them fairly clean. It's not enough to impact them. You still want to, get up there and take a look at them? Yes. Again, unless you're in somewhere the Southwest or you had a trailer that's been parked forever, somewhere that's very dusty, then you might get enough buildup on. For the most part, they're pretty forgiving and not, very impacted by it. All right. Lift gates, just like anything else we talked about, you got to have the proper spec. And batteries are the heart of this too. Again, to see everything in my travels over the years is you still have to look at CCA. You got to look at reserve capacity. Again, people, still look at, CCA as the all, defining spec if a battery is good or bad. For liftgate especially, you don't need high CCAs. You want much lower to get better reserve capacity and better cycling. And the other thing too is, for most fleets, the truck battery and liftgate battery can be the same one. They have close enough to the same life and what you're trying to do. You can use the same batteries. I was at a fleet the other day though, and they're running car batteries in their liftgates. For some reason, they had lots of problems. There's nowhere you can get the same performance out of a car battery as you are out of Group 31. But you still got to do all the same testing. You still got to do the same maintenance. That got to break them apart, separate them, clean them, make sure the hold downs are right. I see a ton of that with lift gates too. Is people just don't touch them, or they think, well, I'm going to put batteries in it, and in a few weeks yet, so why do I have to do all this? Well, if you're putting batteries in that often, you've got something else wrong, and you take a look at the charging system, the operation, what's happening that you're having batteries that often. And liftgate battery boxes are usually some of the worst for corrosion. They're not very well sealed. You can get a lot of spray from the road. So you've got, road salts, magnesium chloride, beet juice, all these things that can get in there. So you definitely want to make sure you're properly maintaining them. And one thing about, battery maintenance is you still got to make sure you do all the right things and protect them once you have done a service. So we get a lot of questions about battery protectant sprays. Not here to sell you any of those either. There's, good ones on the market. Bottom line, you're just wanting something that's going to protect the bare metal from getting corroded after when it's in service. So many different sprays. I've seen some people use spray paint. As long as you're protecting it, kudos, that's what you're trying to do. One thing you have to be very careful about, there's a lot of misnomers on dielectric grease that people think, dielectric grease helps conduct electricity. No. It is a corrosion preventer or a thermal transfer is the reason behind, dielectric grease. It has nothing to do with helping conduct electricity. So any of those sprays you use, you have to be very careful about. So make sure everything's clean, tight, then apply it, and be very careful how much you apply. I've looked even at some of the new trucks, and looks like people put grease on with a boat oar. There's so much on it that when you have to wind up going through 20 shop towels just getting all the grease off of it. Obviously, that just creates more headache for the techs trying to deal with it. But as all that grease and all those sprays break down, you get dust sticks to it, everything. Batteries will self-discharge through all that slime and grime on top of a battery. So use it sparingly. And make sure you clean everything good. I'll never tell anybody they got to spend 3 hours cleaning batteries, but when you part of your service, you should at least grab some spray, some shop towels, wipe them off, make sure everything's clean. Plus, that's just good for when the driver comes and gets his truck and you tell him check the batteries, you did whatever. He opens up the battery box. Hey, somebody's been in here. They've done something. If not, first reaction is, you didn't do anything. I've told you I got a problem. You didn't even check them. So, many reasons to do that. Again, inspection on these. We talked about that, date code before. Is look how old those batteries are. What is your typical life? Lots of things you can see in here. The picture on the right, there's a battery hold down that has no bolts in it. It was just sitting there flopping around. And I actually got another picture, took that bar out, and it was actually all arced up on both ends. One side was touching positive, the other end was touching negative. Very surprised they did not have a thermal event with the way that hold down bar was bouncing around. But look at all your connections in there. Has this been at someone's repair place before? You got bad butt connectors, improper ends. And there's a lot of things you can look at. You see a big blob or a really thick spot of heat shrink. Usually someone's using a heat shrink trying to hold something together or cover up a screw up. So be aware that's not how that harness was shipped out. Take a look at it. You may have to replace a wire, you may have to replace a harness, but if you don't take care of it now, it's only going to get worse. And the whole thing on all these things too is you got to look at the entire system. There's many different ways to charge liftgate batteries. Is it the right system? Have things changed? Do I need more charge time? Do I need maybe 2 different ways to charge batteries? Can I charge from the reefer? Can I charge from solar? Can I do this? Can I do that? And those are things that we can help you on. Is with data recorders, things like that. Is are you still speccing the right thing for what you're trying to get done? Here's a couple of pictures show lots of headaches there. The one on the right, no battery hold down. The circuit breaker for the system's not mounted properly. Someone changing an end on the cable. It's not even connected to the circuit breaker anymore. A bad butt connector that was done. Not only is it an inferior type of connection, I'm not a big fan of any of the plastic, nylon, vinyl terminals, but it's not even long enough to totally cover the exposed wire. So yes, they got that truck running, but that thing's destined for another failure. The other thing, picture on the right, even though they're both the same brand of batteries, you can tell they're 2 different models and different ages. So road call looking for a place to happen. And just like checking the charging system on the truck, you have to actually check the charging system on the gate. And best thing to do that is a voltmeter and an amp meter. Use your voltmeter and look at open circuit voltage. You start the truck or reefer, whatever it is you're using to charge it. Start it up, does your voltage climb? Use a clip-on amp meter on the output. Is current going into it? Is it the right current? That just like we talked about, testing the solar or whatever, that if your batteries are charged, it's not going to have much output. So you may have to cycle that gate, make sure you're getting full output out of it. APU, talking about an engine-driven type unit, is, it's no different than a truck. It's got its own, battery, which would be, again, the truck batteries, but it has its own cables connecting to your truck batteries. So you got to make sure those cables are good. It's got its own alternator to recharge the system. You got to test it. Is it the right performance? Years ago, we had a problem, or a fleet that was having lots of problems with their APU, and the way the system was configured with the output in the max engine RPM, that if it was in air conditioning mode, it only produced about 2 extra amps compared to what it was consuming. So if you had anything else on at that time, you were in a net loss even though that engine was running. So you got to make sure it is spec properly. EPU, electric power or battery powered system, Now you're talking something that does have its own batteries. Most of the trucks now are going to have 6 to 8 batteries to help support that system. Are they the right batteries? Most of those people use a premium, generally an AGM battery. Yes, they're expensive. If you change and put a generic flooded cell battery in there, is that going to impact your life and your cycling and everything? 100%. And also too is those systems, they're going to have to recharge when the truck starts. Is the charging system sufficient to be able to put that energy back in it? So another time you use your test equipment to do a voltage drop test. Can we get that energy from the alternator or from the main batteries to charge those batteries? Oh, there's my missing picture. So again, you can see kind of an example of a bad recharge program, that everything's in one pile, new batteries, old batteries, whatever. Again, I was at a fleet the other day and was looking in their scrap pile. They had batteries that were 3 months old in them that someone quote unquote tested them, said they're bad, so they're in the scrap pile. It's amazing. When I first started doing this 33 years ago, I had a hard time selling a Delco battery for 60 some odd dollars. Now, if you look at what fleets are paying for batteries, $100 minimum for a decent Group 31 anymore. You got to make sure we're recovering those things and getting all the life we can out of them. Again, kind of an outline of what the right procedures are, and we've done other presentations more directly on a recharge room. That's easy money that fleets are stepping over, that you can recover and put back into service. Oh, there's my other missing one. You can see in the picture that there's a wire hanging over the fairing there, and the other end of it's hanging down. That just got to take a look at it, make sure you do a good inspection on all these things. All righty, it's question time. Feel free I've got a few of them here that people have popped in. Feel free to type any more that you'd like to answer, and I'll kind of go through what we have here so far. One question was, what is voltage drop spec? The cut and dry ones, when we go back to TMC RP 129, is for your cranking cables for heavy duty truck, you're allowed no more than half a volt at 500 amps. It doesn't matter if it's a what brand of truck it is, whatever, as long as it's a heavy duty Class 8 truck, that is the spec. When we do the alternator or charge cable spec, you are allowed half a volt at rated output of the alternator. So if you've got a 200 amp alternator, that's what you got to put in your tester, use carbon pile, load it down the 200, you're allowed no more than half a volt. Now, one thing always comes up on some of our tech questions and stuff is, well, I thought it was per connection. It's like, no, you're allowed half a volt in that entire circuit. When I say entire circuit, that's the positive cable and the negative cable all combined. If you have extra connections in there, that means you're going to have to up your wire gauge, because you're still not allowed to exceed that half a volt. And the reason for that is, for cranking circuits, the more voltage drop you have, the harder it is on the starter. The slower it's going to allow that starter to spin the crank. That it doesn't take a whole lot of voltage drop, especially in winter, because if we were saying we had half a volt at 500 amps, if you're in the middle of winter and that engine's very hard to crank and we're pulling 2,000, now even at spec you're allowed 2 whole volts. So it doesn't take long before you get to the point that you don't have enough speed to fire the engine. Plus you can actually pull the voltage down low enough that even the ECUs and stuff can't even power up to enable the engine to crank. And when we talk about charging cables, the reason for the spec is, again, the ability to put the energy back into those batteries whenever it does restart. The other question was, what's better, battery bank test on batteries or individually testing them for PM? If you're doing, depends how often you're doing those PMs. If you do one every 3 months, which was the question, the ones in between, so if you broke it by, throughout the year, I would still do a full PM, separating everything, load testing everything in that spring before summer and the fall before winter. In between those times, if the truck's in, the battery bank test is a great test. That's what it was designed for. But you can't get away from actually taking things apart, cleaning, tightening, again, at least twice a year. Other than that, yeah, the bank test is great. The other thing I highly recommend the bank test for is when you get new trucks, you're putting them in service. It's a great quick snapshot as, hey, does everything look good before I put this thing on the road? Got one more here. Someone asked if we put out a spec sheet for testing solar panels. We have not done one, but be more than happy to put one together for fleets that are running our solar to make it an easy way for techs in the field to properly test them. So I will reach out to the person that put in that one and figure out a shop procedure for you. Any other questions? And I think that's all we got. But before anyone jumps off, I want to make sure you do stick around because we do have some poll questions and some survey questions that are always at the end of our webinars. And one of the biggest things on that too is if you have ideas. We do this to try to help the industry. We did not want this, and hopefully it did not seem as salesy. We're trying to help and give back and take care of the industry and customers to help keep your fleet on the road and make sure you keep your costs down. Times are tight, and freight's not always great. So how can we save money? And some of that's by making sure we're doing all the right things for maintaining. So I will say thank you. Appreciate you.